The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on any information provided here is solely at your own risk.
Welcome. This is Birth, Baby. Your hosts are Sierra Morgan and Samantha Kelly. Sierra is a birth doula, hypnobirthing educator, and pediatric sleep consultant.
Samantha is a birth doula, childbirth educator, and lactation counselor. Join us as we guide you through your options for your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support. If you enjoy our content, please be sure to like, follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps us gain visibility to other people that could benefit from listening in. Hello, everyone. Today we are here with Dr. Cristina Cavezza, and she is a clinical psychologist, research supervisor, and podcaster, which is pretty fun to be on with another podcaster. She's the host of the Fierce, Kind Mama of Multiples podcast, which provides practical information and insightful conversations for parents of twins, triplets, or even more. And she has over 15 years of experience in the mental health field. So we are so excited to have you here today to talk with us about being a mama of multiples. Neither of us are, but we're very interested in all of the things because we work with twin mamas quite a bit.
Lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you on and learn a little bit more about multiples. We've had the honor of being able to work with a couple of twin moms just in the last year or so. We've had a few, and it's just always so exciting because they have just so many extra pieces. So for us, we always say, serving families is like playing chess. And when we get to work with twin moms, it's like a little extra level of the chess game. So it's kind of fun. And it's cool to see these people doing something that is just like so crazy, growing 2 or 3 or more entire human beings in their body. So it's so exciting to see. So to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples?
Yeah, for sure. I guess, obviously I didn't come into this by accident in the sense that I am a twin mom. So a lot of what I do now is inspired by my own journey of being a twin mom and having a multiple birth pregnancy and everything that came, I guess the sequelae, everything that came after that. So, prior to this, prior to starting this business, and prior to having twins, it's a bit of a funny story, but I worked actually as a forensic psychologist. So a very different world to what I'm doing now. And then when I found out I was having twins, it was a complete shock to the system. The pregnancy wasn't unexpected, but twins was. And it's funny because, I look at it now and I think, why didn't I, why was it such a surprise? I have a lot of twins in my family, but I just didn't think that I had forgotten kind of about that. I didn't know a lot about the lineage and didn't know about some of the twins that were in my family. So I didn't have that knowledge anyway, but I just didn't expect it. It wasn't on the radar. And so, then when I was told it was twins and that it was a high-risk pregnancy because I was having MCD8 twins, so monochorionic diamniotic twins, meaning that they had their own sacs, but they shared a placenta, which meant that the risks of things like twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome was much higher. And I was heavily monitored. And those scans, I remember going for the ultrasounds. It started off every fortnight, so every 2 weeks. And then that quickly became every week. And, just going to those appointments, it was very medical, I guess, and kind of clinical. There wasn't that, I'm going to go to the ultrasound and see my beautiful babies on the screen. It wasn't like that at all. It was very much like they're not even talking to you as they're doing the scans, and they're looking for complications. And then they'd say things to you, like occasionally, oh, we see some discrepancy in the amniotic fluid, so we just want you to come back in next week just to have another look. And so you're left kind of leaving that appointment wondering, ooh, is there something wrong? And so, when I talk to multiple birth parents now, and this is a common kind of theme that you hear, there can be a lot of anxiety. And so here I was a forensic psychologist. I was also, a clinical psychologist. So I was trained in kind of helping people with anxiety, but I found myself feeling anxious during the pregnancy and feeling really worried about the risks. And so that kind of started my own journey into, how do I want to help other people with this? And so I, after having my boys, I quickly started seeing other aspects of parenting multiples that I guess are not really understood or poorly understood by even medical professionals, even people that I had contact with, so speech pathologists or psychologists, even other psychologists, and so that got me interested and I guess inspired me to want to create something specifically for parents of multiples, something to help them with their parenting journey, because there's so many demands on you as a parent of multiples. There's so many stressors that we experience that aren't, as I said before, either they're not understood, they're not recognized, or they're not even, just acknowledged by the general community and even of professionals. So that's what led me to want to create parenting programs specifically for parents of multiples to help them on their journey.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we find with twin families or multiples families is they don't even know what those additional struggles might be. So how can you plan for something mentally and logistically if you don't even know what those things might be? So we actually have in my neighborhood, we have a family that has triplets. And the dad is always like, you guys don't get it. Like nobody else gets it. It is just a different ball game. You have if you have separate kids at different ages, if you have 3 kids, that's a lot of kids. You have to manage still 3 bodies, 3 emotions, but at different levels of learning, different needs for different ages. We have 3 8-year-olds that all have 8-year-old needs. It's just different. So we all know that having one baby versus multiple babies is for sure a different ball game. From your experience, because you've worked with so many families with multiples, sometimes they have multiples first. Sometimes they have singleton pregnancies and babies and then multiples somewhere down the way. Do you have any indication, or is there kind of a norm of it's typically easier if you have the multiples before you have other kids, or is it typically easier if you already have a little bit of parenting under your belt before you get these multiples?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to be one of those really annoying people. And I'm going to say, I think it depends. Because the answer to this question, in my opinion, depends on so many individual factors that are going to be unique to each family situation, each parent, each child, and even within the same family with 2 parents. Like we can see differences in how each parent finds the experience of raising multiples. Some parents I speak with, they might find that having their multiples after they have already had a child is easier because they have experience with raising a baby, and they know on some level that while having multiples will be harder, they also know what to expect when it comes to caring for a baby. So they've had some practice and experience, and that can sometimes be a good thing. But some parents who have already had a child will struggle more when the multiple babies arrive because the experience is so different to what they've already experienced. And that can be because, perhaps their multiples might have been born prematurely. And so they're navigating a neonatal journey, neonatal intensive care unit journey. And they may, in fact, need a lot of time to recover physically and emotionally from that experience. But that's hard because they already have a child or more at home that needs them. Um, and then, some parents will say that having multiples as their first children is better because that's all they've ever known. And they can simply focus on their multiples rather than having to parent other children at the same time that, they need to attend to their multiple babies. I think a lot of this too might depend on the age gap between the singletons and the multiples, because some parents will say that having an older sibling or siblings for the multiple babies was really helpful because the older sibling or siblings could be guided to, do certain things and help with the babies. But a lot of this is also then going to depend on the children. The age gap, as I said, what is the age gap between the singleton and the multiples? What is the personality and temperament of the individual children and the babies? Some parents will say that having multiple babies was a breeze compared to their fussy singleton that never slept. Whereas other parents might say that having multiple babies was so much more work than their singleton because they were constantly having to get up overnight and settle their babies. I think, many people will say that the first year of raising multiples is almost like a blur because the demands on their time and energy are so great. They're just in this constant cycle of feeding, changing, and settling. Whereas other parents might get to a stage where they've managed to sync their multiples nap times quite well, and their multiple babies are great sleepers. And so again, I think every family situation will be different. And a lot of this will depend, as I said before, I suppose, on the temperament and personality of the children, as well as the parents' mindset. Because I think that sometimes what we forget is how well we cope with stress. So, how well can you as a parent handle stress? How well can you as a parent handle your emotions when you're sleep deprived and you're stretched physically, mentally, financially? So, again, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules here, other than we know from the research that most multiple birth families face some pretty significant stressors, which I'm sure we can get into. And it doesn't really seem to matter whether the multiple babies were born first or not.
Definitely. I'm thinking last year we had two moms who were due with twins at really close together. One of them, it was their first pregnancy, and they were having multiples, and the other one was their second pregnancy, and they were having multiples, and they had an older child. And both of them, I felt like I was just so amazed by both of them because they both handled it with their transition was so graceful. And now one of the moms who had twins first, she's having a second baby, or third baby, second pregnancy here soon. And she was just commenting to us recently that she felt like her husband and her were going to be fighting over the baby because there was only one baby this time to hold, and they weren't going to both have their own baby. And it was just so sweet.
Another cool thing about them is they had friends that had twins like a year before they did. So they got handed down a ton of twin stuff. Both of them had insurance coverage or whatever that had, I think it's called Twiniversity or something, that it was covering them getting specific to twin help. And it was funny because that couple, even when I went for their postpartum follow-up visit, they were like, I feel bad for people that only get to bring home one baby because we would be fighting over this baby. And yeah, like she said, now they're like, well, what are we going to do when there's only one to come home?
So sweet. I love that. Everyone has a different journey, I think for some people it is kind of like being thrown into the fire, and for some people it's a walk in the park. And I definitely agree. A lot of it is temperament of the baby. I think a lot of it is temperament of the parents too. For I'm thinking of Sierra and I, who are very type A people. I think we would struggle with twins.
I had nightmares that I was pregnant with twins. This mama couldn't handle it.
So what would you say are the biggest hurdles that families with multiples face?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, there are a lot. I think we know from the research that There are many challenges. And unfortunately, as I said before, I think it is worth highlighting again, though, that there are many challenges for multiple birth families that I think aren't always well understood or recognized, even by the professionals that work with multiple birth families. So, I've heard countless stories of people coming across various professionals on their parenting journey that don't seem to fully appreciate the situation these parents are in. Like they might offer advice, and the parent is looking at them thinking, well, that's great. And yes, in an ideal world, I'd like to follow that advice, but how am I meant to do that with two or more babies when I'm on my own? I can think of plenty of parents who've sought out advice on how to help their babies sleep better, for example, and they'll be given strategies that just aren't feasible for the parents to do, particularly if the parent is solo parenting or their partner is away a lot for work or not there for daytime naps, for example. So that's the first thing, that the challenges they face aren't always acknowledged. I think the second thing is families with multiples represent the minority of live births, but we're overrepresented when it comes to health problems for both parents and children. So women pregnant with multiples are at greater risk of virtually every single complication compared to women pregnant with one baby. And, sadly, the risks don't stop once the babies are born. Multiples tend to be born more prematurely, and that can lead to a whole host of other risks and complications for the babies, but even as they develop and grow up. I think one of the things we sometimes forget is the increased family financial stress due to the increased medical and other costs, less earning capacity because of the increased time demands for childcaring. There can be an increased risk of social isolation, anxiety, and depression in both multiple birth mothers and fathers. In many countries, the research shows that there's inadequate bereavement support when one or more babies do not survive. Other difficulties we might see might be in the first 5 years of multiple birth children's lives, and these include things like possible developmental delays, their speech, language, learning, social, cognitive delays. Sometimes multiple birth children are at greater risk of special, they end up having special needs or a disability. And then there's even kind of more, even just the everyday things, like there's unique educational considerations. I've had families grapple with things like the age of school entry. So what if one of your multiples seems more ready than the other? Do you send one to school and not his or her sibling or siblings? Do you keep them all back so that they start together? And when you do send them to school for the first time, is it better that they are in different classes so that their individuality can be enhanced? What if one of the multiples, though, relies heavily on the other, but the other one wants to be more independent? So even questions like this around classroom placement, how to navigate when one multiple gets invited to a social outing and the other doesn't. Like all of these can, even those might sound like minor things, but they can place a lot of extra pressure on parents who have maybe, seemingly survived the early years, but now they have a host of other unique challenges to contend with that aren't necessarily understood by those that aren't involved in multiple birth communities. I think one thing I really do.
I was going to say, with the twins not being invited to the same thing, I was actually a nanny of twins. Well, they had 3 when I started and they got twins later. And then I was all 5 of their nanny. But with the twins not being and their oldest 2 were very close in age. So they would get kind of bummed when the other one didn't get in, when they didn't get invited to something. But they were, 1 year apart, but it still really hurt their feelings when they weren't invited. But with the twins, it's just different. It's like hey, we're on the same field here. Like we're in the same groups. We have the same friends. And I wasn't invited, and that is a whole nother level because that competition or identity in each other, it's just different with twins. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that some people maybe they're like, oh, well, all kids get upset when their sibling is invited to something they're not, but it's just different.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's, a psychology behind that around the twinship being part of the twinship is there's me as an individual, but then there's us. And it's trying to kind of, a lot of the twinship journey, if you like, for the individual twins is to separate not only from their parents as they grow up, but to separate from each other and become individuals, which when they're young, really young, they don't yet really have that as much of a concept of that they're individuals. They know that they are, but there's part of them is still, there's always this other part of them that's still there that feels like part of them, part of their identity. Yeah. So one of the other things I just wanted to highlight, in terms of challenges is mental health, because I think that um, it's really staggering to me, the statistics on this. We know from the research that around 6 in 10 parents of multiples experience mental health challenges in their first year of parenting. And that's opposed to 1 in 5 mothers and 1 in 10 fathers of singletons. So we also know from some research that parents of multiples are around 9 times more likely to experience disabling exhaustion. So I think that, there's, I think we just have to work a lot harder in some ways to pay attention to some of those challenges and to recognize them and to seek support early. And that's where I think a lot of my work is focused on is around prevention. How can we, even if you feel like you're really excited about becoming a multiple birth parent, like you actually, you're not nervous about it. You're not all that worried. You feel like you can cope. And I think that's great. I still think though that, any parent can do some work to, help do work on themselves, to prepare for becoming a parent, right? Becoming a parent of multiples is a unique journey and it can be stressful. And I think there are going to be stressors along the way, but we can be, if we spend the time and we invest our time and energy in looking after ourselves, and that includes not just our physical health, because I think we spend a lot of time, we think about that a lot, especially when we're pregnant, what do I need to eat? How much sleep do I need to get? We think a lot about that. But there's the emotional well-being too, that I think we sometimes don't pay a lot of attention to. And that's what I like to focus on. How can we be more emotionally prepared for the challenges that we might face, that we're bound to face as a parent? Because let's face it, whether you're a parent of multiples or you're a parent of singletons, there are going to be stressors, right? There are always stressors. Parenting isn't always easy. And it's about being emotionally prepared for that journey.
Yeah, one of the things that we find with all parents is when preparing, they want the magic thing, right? Like they want the item that's going to make their lives easier. And while there are so many products on the market and really some of them are silly and we don't need them, helping mental health and sleep and all of those things, sometimes there are products that make our lives a little bit easier and can give us a little more graceful entry into these things. Are there any twin specific products or even singleton products that you should get two of that you're like, okay, this really could make a big difference in your journey?
Yeah. It's again, I think, I hesitate a little bit to give sort of advice on equipment and things like that, just because I think that, what works for some doesn't work for others. And what I would hate for listeners to do is go out and buy a bunch of stuff because I say that, this is what worked for me. But there, I definitely think that there are some things you need to consider when you're having multiples, which are, what are the essentials, right? And I think at the end of the day, what your babies really want from you is your love, care, and attention, right? And obviously food, like they need some level of nutrition and they need somewhere to sleep. Those are the main things, right? So what is going to make your life easier is how can you facilitate those things? And I think if you're on a journey of like, I want to breastfeed, then I definitely think there are products out there that can make that a bit easier. So I've seen and I've used myself, what I found particularly helpful. There are different feeding pillows on the market, but one that, I rate highly, and I guess that I hear from a lot of other parents of multiples, they tend to like, is something called the My Breast Friend pillow. And that you can even use that, I've seen people use that with triplets as well. So they'll have like They're still tandem feeding, breastfeeding, but they'll have the triplet, the third baby, if you like, nearby, right? So kind of resting on something near. And then they can easily, swap. Well, I shouldn't say easily, because does take a lot of work and a lot of challenge to figure this out. And usually, that you may need a helper. If I were being perfectly honest, if you have triplets, you may need a helper to help, get that third baby into place and, to swap. I mean, that, like, realistically, that is probably what's going to happen. But with twins, it is very doable to do that on your own, to have sort of how I've seen this is, and how I did it myself. You kind of have like a docking station where you have both babies somewhere safe, and then you can latch one on the pillow, and then you can latch the other one on the pillow. So that's great for tandem breastfeeding. Now, a lot of people do struggle with tandem breastfeeding and don't always get the hang of it and like to do individual, breastfeeding. And that's great. So you might not even need the pillow then if you're just feeding one at a time, right? So again, what works for some isn't going to work for everyone. But that is one product if you are thinking of a tandem breastfeeding journey, that's one that I think, get a pillow, to help with comfort. It just helps, like, especially if you're recovering from like a C-section. That might not be the case for you, but, with multiple births, often that is the case, that there's a cesarean section. That's how you delivered. So it can be really hard, in those early days. You want to be comfortable. And I think having the pillow just creates a little bit more comfort there. If you're bottle
feeding, I do really
feeding,
love that pillow. That's a really great, especially, even for singleton pregnancies, I love that one wraps around and provides a little more, there's the other one, the boppy, which is a good one, but I think it's not as like firm as the breast friend. So it's just a little bit different.
It is a little bit different. And I like, one thing I liked about it too, is that it had that kind of, when you wrap it around, it just sits a little bit higher up. And sometimes if you have really small babies, what I've seen people do, and what I did personally too, was like you sort of put swaddles or some blankets underneath just to prop their heads up even a little bit higher. But you can do that with that pillow. Like, it allows you to do that. I was going to say, with bottle feeding, if people are bottle feeding, one thing I found, a particular product that I quite like, is Dr. Brown's bottles. And there are probably others on the market too, but the anti-colic bottles, I find, like Dr. Brown's, are good for premature babies, and babies that might have a bit of trouble with getting too much air in when they're feeding off the bottle, which then can, cause other problems like that kind of upset tummy or gas or spitting up and all of that. So I found those two products for feeding, I would say, I rate very highly. I think other things that you might want to think about, if you're having multiples in terms of products, is something like a double pram or stroller. Because if, I think getting out of the house is really important at some stage. Maybe not right away, maybe not even for the first 2 months, and that's fine. But you want to have some way of transporting and getting around. And I think it can be really helpful in those early days too, to have some way of getting out for a walk and getting fresh air, and even as a way to settle. So I remember in those early days having my boys, even if I was literally just in the house, if they were both really unsettled, but putting them in that double pram so I could rock them that way, at the same time. And that was just really helpful. I know some families with like triplets or higher order multiples will invest in something like a wagon or buggy. There are specific ones on the market. Again, I would just say, look for something that's within your budget. What I would advise, because they can be really expensive, but what I would advise also is trying it before you buy it, if you can. So, a lot of shops will let you, bring some weights, bring something that you can mimic the weight of a baby and just see what it's like pushing it. Because I know, like, where I live in a very hilly area. And I remember having my boys around the age of, I guess they were about 3, and they were still wanting to go into the stroller. And it was just so incredibly challenging pushing them up these huge hills, at that point with that particular stroller that I had, because their weight was, it was just unreal. It felt like a real workout. So I would
Or I've
just say,
seen people get like the side by side strollers, and then they're so big that they don't fit through doorways or like
yeah.
through, the aisles of stores and stuff like that. And that's a little bit heartbreaking to spend that much money on a stroller and then it not suit, the need that you're needing it for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I had one of those inline ones. So I had it where they were on top of each other, and for that reason. But other people, do say the ones that are side by side are perfectly fine for them. And I think it just depends, where you live, where are you going, where do you need to get to? So having a think about all of that, trying it out before you buy it, putting the weights in there to see how hard is this to actually push. Another product, I think, if you're into baby wearing, and you want to wear your twins, or and I've seen some people do this with triplets too. I personally found baby wearing one baby at a time was more comfortable. And that was only because I think my boys were quite big when they were born. They were born at very good gestational weights. So, and I also found that, I would use it more if one baby was more unsettled than the other. But definitely, again, I would just suggest trying out different ones if you can before you invest, because it can be tricky if you're trying to baby wear your twins or your triplets, and you're trying to do it all by yourself and trying to figure out how to do it. So I would definitely suggest, before you invest in that, have a go at it first.
So many different things out there. It is like a magic trick watching people baby wear multiples. I'm always like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? I can't get one baby onto my back, much less one on my back and one on my front. It's crazy. It's awesome. Multiple moms are magicians of all sorts. So with Fierce Kind Mama, what are the services or offerings that you have for families of multiples?
Yeah. So I have a few. So the first one I have is a guided relaxation exercise for pregnant mamas. And that's really around, it's kind of two-pronged. Like, there's obviously the physical discomfort that can come when you're having, when you're having multiples. You can be, you might feel really heavy. It's awkward moving around. You might be actually in a lot of extreme amounts of pain. You might be having difficulty sleeping. You might have nausea. You might, be vomiting even, still in your pregnancy. So all of that, what the research shows is guided relaxation exercises can benefit, because sometimes the thing is, we can't always get rid of these symptoms, right? Like, we can't always take medications, or there isn't a solution, and I think a lot of times people have this feeling like, oh, it's just something I have to endure because I'm pregnant with multiples. But I would say what we can do is change our relationship to the pain and the discomfort. And that's by practicing guided relaxation. So I have a particular one that I do, that I have available on my website for purchase, that people can use. But when I said it was two-pronged, it's not just looking at the physical stuff, it's also the emotional and the worries or anxieties you might have. So if you're, worried at all about how the birth will go, or you have some anxiety around that, or some fear, or maybe you're even just thinking, how am I going to cope when the babies arrive? Like, you might, have some worries about that, which are understandable and perfectly normal, by the way. I should, preface this all with saying it is all completely valid and normal, the feelings that pregnant mothers go through. And they're really common. So I use a guided relaxation exercise that tries to deal with both of those aspects, the physical as well as the emotional. And then I also have a relationships workshop for couples. So I feel that's really important, because I think that's often another overlooked area, is that everybody's thinking about, what do I need to do to prepare, my house maybe, and the rest of the family for the multiples, in terms of, like, if you have other kids, or, what do I even need to do to prepare? But I don't think a lot of couples spend enough time, working on their relationship and dealing, navigating and negotiating and communicating about how they're going to manage these new additions to the family as a couple. And so I actually call it how do you baby proof your relationship? Because we spend a lot of our time when the babies start crawling and walking, we baby proof our home, right? And we try to make it safe and for the babies. But what about your relationship? What about baby proofing your relationship? Because we know from the research, again, sadly, that the statistics show that the number one factor that leads to dissatisfaction in a relationship is the birth of the first child. And when you have multiple babies, if you throw multiple babies into the mix, you can only imagine how that amplifies problems, right? And as we spoke before about all the problems that parents of multiples can face, the challenges, the stressors, it's bound to affect the couple's relationship. So I do have a workshop on that that's available. And then I have another program that is suitable for soon-to-be parents, so pregnant parents, as well as those with young multiples at home. And this one focuses a lot more on the emotional well-being of the parents and how they can learn ways of managing the everyday stressors that come with raising more than one tiny human at a time, and also learning how to manage their own emotions effectively so that they can then be a better role model to their kids and that they can raise emotionally resilient children. Because I think the approach that I take is really about, it's a family systems approach. Like we don't just live in isolation, right? With our own little problems and our own little worries. What we know from the research, and this bears out time and time again, particularly how the parents, the caregivers are feeling and managing their own emotions, that has an effect. There's even research that shows it has an effect on the relationship between the children. So the quality of the twins' relationship can be affected by how well the parents are managing their own emotions. So I place a lot of emphasis on that latter part, that emotional well-being in that last program. And all of that is available on my website.
You really covered it all. Like those are really amazing offerings and things that are kind of hard to find that are twin specific. And I think that is something that is lacking, and that's why we were so interested in talking to you, is these families that ask us for resources, we don't always have a whole lot of them. So when we found out about you, we were pretty excited about that. If someone wanted to explore working with you or any of these, we'll also have them in the show notes, of course. But do you want to, for people that are Audible listeners and they're never going to go look back at the show notes, do you want to tell them how to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you can connect with me on Instagram or Facebook. My handle is Fierce Kind Mama of Multiples. You can also head over to my website, fiercekindmama.com, and you can check out my services and my programs there. And I also, I know this will be in the podcast show notes, but as you said, some people might not go to that. So there will be, I would love to offer your, community of listeners a 20% discount off my Be Fierce, Be Kind program. That's the one that I was speaking about, that's designed specifically for soon-to-be and current parents of multiples to help them deal with the everyday stressors of raising more than one tiny human at a time so that they can thrive and their children can thrive. So if you visit my website, fiercekindmama.com, and head over to the services page and check out the Be Fierce, Be Kind program, and you enter birth baby at the checkout page, then you can get a 20% discount on that program.
That's so awesome of you to offer that to them. Thank you so much for that. And just thank you for taking the time to be here. Those of you listening, you don't know, but she's not here. She is in Australia. You're in Australia, right?
Yeah, I'm in Australia.
It's like 11 o'clock at night when she is doing this with us. And she was so sweet to stay up with us. So we really, really, really appreciate you being here.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure connecting with you.
Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll definitely stay connected.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Birth Baby. Thanks again to Longing for Orpheus for our music. You can look him up on Spotify. Remember to leave a review, share, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.